Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. George Conway is back with us today. We shall chat with George in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and to be notified every time we post a new episode. So let me tell you about George Conway. He is an attorney, political activist, and legal and political commentator. He is president of the Society for the Rule of Law, the executive director of the Anti-Psychopath Political Action Committee, and a founder of the Lincoln Project. He is host of the Bulwark's podcast, George Conway Explains It All, to Sarah Longwell, and he is a contributing writer to The Atlantic. He previously worked as a litigator for 3 decades at the law firm of Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz in New York City. George, welcome back into the back room.
Hi, Andy. How are you doing?
Great. So we've got 4 days to go. How are you feeling about the election?
I feel good. I understand why some people are very alarmed. I mean, it's, as I said probably too many times to count, I mean, a 10% or 20% or even a 30% chance of nuclear total destruction is a bad thing. But I do think with some, I'm not going to say confidence in the sense that I think that it's a lock, but I think she's highly likely to win, and Vice President Harris, and I feel good about that. And, I think what we're going to see is massive turnout among women. I mean, this is unscientific, conceitedly, and we're going to see a lot of crossover Republican voting. Crossovers, either of people who are registered as Republicans or Republican-leaning types. I think that's what I think is we're going to see, and I think it's going to, I hope, result in a fairly clean victory fairly quickly.
CNN had a poll out this week that had a couple of what I consider to be fascinating data points. One was that there are still 6% undecideds, which, when you think about it, it's like, Hitler didn't grab you? Like, what are they waiting for? And do you believe that that's a true metric? Like, are there really that many undecideds this week?
I mean, I do think there are people who will say that. And I do think, are they truly undecided? I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't want to say who they're going to vote for. A lot of people who, a lot of people will give undecided to answer that to any question. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Are they truly, truly undecided and torn? It's impossible to know that question. You can only know the responses they decide to give to pollsters. And I'm not saying people just necessarily lie to pollsters, but, some random person calls me up on the phone. First of all, I'm not going to answer it. Secondly, even if I answered it, I'd probably give them about 2 minutes of my time. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, I'm not sure, I'm not sure I wouldn't blow them off by saying, I don't know, I'm deciding on other issues. So,
right.
Me, it's like, I'm going to say there's no fucking way I'll vote for Trump, but they're not, people don't necessarily, we don't know. These people may have, they're like, for example, I was on C-SPAN the other day, and somebody, they had a Harris-Walz line, a Trump-Vance line, and an undecided line. And people were calling on the undecided line. And there was one guy basically calls on the undecided line and says, I love everything you do and blah, blah, blah. And what you say about, hey, dude, you don't sound undecided, right? I don't know. I mean, some people don't like to just, time I ask my son, do you want X or Y? He, gives me an undecided answer. Although, I don't know how that really, I don't know what the psychology of undecided, I don't know. And it could be that, it could be they're afraid of giving the answer because they're afraid that somebody's going to come down on them like a ton of bricks, although that's not going to happen during a polling interview.
I interviewed Gretchen Carlson yesterday, and she had an interesting take on the 6% undecided situation. She believes that there's a lot of people that are going to ultimately be deciding based on feeling, like a visceral feeling they get in this last week. Like they watched the MSG rally or they watched her speech on the ellipse. And and I try to stay objective because my first thought is, how could anyone still be undecided? But then it got me thinking, and I started thinking, like, how many times have you been walking around all day going, I just need a bacon cheeseburger tonight. That's all I need. And then you go into the restaurant, you look at the menu, and it's like, oh, the chicken cutlet looks good. And then, like, people are like, what are you having? What are you having? And then everybody's like, oh, I'm going to have this. And then, like, I don't know. And then I'm just going to decide when the waiter comes. Like, how many times have we done that where it's just like, the waiter comes, says, what do you want? And you're like, bacon cheeseburger, chicken cutlet. Like, so I'm kind of starting to understand that, like, maybe there are people that are just, for whatever reason, haven't gotten that feeling yet.
Filet mignon shit sandwich. I mean, you never know. No, seriously, I think that I think there's something to that. And the thing you have to remember about these 6% are not necessarily people who follow politics a lot,
right?
And probably don't read a lot about. I mean, that's the problem that campaigns face, is that they're trying to get through to voters who don't necessarily turn them on of politics. Maybe they'll focus in the last week, and that's great and fine. And there's always late deciders of some sort. I mean, people who they feel like it's a great responsibility that they want to know every single fact until the last moment it comes last thing that comes in. I mean, I can make an argument against early voting. I'm persuaded now by early voting. But one of the things I never liked about early voting was, well, what if something happens in the last week of the campaign?
Right. But you see, that's a great point. There are I've seen interviews with Puerto Rican guys and women, and they're like, I voted early and I voted for Trump, but now I wish I could. So they're out there telling everybody they know who didn't vote yet, change your vote. That's
and you can't do that. I mean, I was corporate litigator, and we used to litigate proxy fights. And one of the great things about proxy fights, you can get agent early voting, right? You send the broker sends you the form that they then send to the company. When you fill it out, of course, now it's all electronic and online. But you can revoke the proxy that you send up until you show up at the annual meeting, and you fill out a proxy, and then everything you did in the past gets revoked. Now, it's a pain in the ass because the proxy solicitors and people who count it, have to match up the people. You can't do that in a presidential election. You can't do that in political elections. Mm-hmm. And so, there's I actually think that there should be, precisely for that reason, there should be some kind of a standardized period, so that everybody knows this is when the campaign starts to end. And so it's the same for a national election. Because I've come to the view that, notwithstanding my prior view that, well, what if something does happen in the last week, and then, all these people have voted for the guy who then is determined to have been an axe murderer. I get it, but I'm happy with early voting now, because I think it gets into the process.
Speaking of the last week, this week has been bonkers. I mean, I don't
know why. I don't know how anybody could have expected it to be otherwise.
But like every morning you wake up and you're like, all right, what did he say last night? And so this morning I got up to the news. Everybody's talking about Liz Cheney. I'm like, what did he do now? Well, he basically called for her execution by a firing squad. Okay. We also know
that's just the way he talks, blah, 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 blah.
Well, we also see this week him, an adjudicated rapist, saying he's going to do things to women, whether they like it or not. How that's not the biggest story.
Yeah, but he's a little bit insensitive. He didn't quite get the memo. What from you?
But do you think any of this has any consequence? Does this make somebody go, you know what, I could deal with the Hitler stuff, but not the shoot Liz Cheney in the face stuff? That's where I draw the line.
I think it has a cumulative effect, okay? And I think the thing that frustrates all of us who's watching this is that any one of what must be several thousand things that he's done, I consider disqualifying. Mm-hmm. And you would consider disqualifying for any candidate, regardless of whether they liked high or low marginal tax rates, or whether or not they liked widget subsidies, or any name policy. It's like, I mean, I will not. You could have somebody who absolutely I agree with on every single issue and who is otherwise thoughtful, but if they said or did any number of the things that Donald Trump has done, any number of thousands of things that he has done over the past 9 years, I would not vote for that person, which is how I ended up where I am today. That being said, I don't know. I mean, you're not going to convince a large swath of the public who has just tuned their mind out. They exclude from their media diet, their informational diet, things that make them have indigestion because they are contrary to their beliefs. But so that's the reason why. It's actually the reason why, contrary to what you're suggesting, very small things can make a big difference. Because it's only a small slice of the public that matters right now. Okay, the people who could have gone either way. I mean, it's like what the Lincoln Project used to call, and 4 years ago, we had this phrase called the Bannon line. We referred to the Bannon line, and it was again after Steve Bannon, and God bless him for now having served his debt to society. He said that basically if Trump loses 5 or 7, I forget what the number was, percent of Republicans, he loses. And so this stuff matters because it could be the straw that broke the camel's back. And all of this is cumulative.
Do you think he's lost that percentage or something close to it so far?
Oh, yeah, I do. That's why I feel good about this election. I mean, the only question is, that there are things that are going in Kamala Harris's favor, and there are things that are going in Donald Trump's favor, even though he doesn't deserve it. In Kamala Harris's favor, you have this incredible energy, or what I think is this incredible energy. We'll see after the exit polls are in, after the election results are in, among women. And I think we do see erosion among Republican or right-leaning voters. And then Trump has, he has had more success with Hispanic voters than in the past. He is also having impact even among blacks as far as men are concerned, because there is more of a gender divide than before. We don't know for real, and this is the uncertainty, which of those effects will dominate. I happen to think that it's likely that the pro-Harris effects will dominate, but we really don't know. But again, all of these little things are cumulative, and they can make a difference on the margins. And we're talking about the margins here.
You mentioned the Hispanic voters. How consequential do you think the Puerto Rican gaffe is going to be? And his A, inability to yet apologize, and B, what he said in New Mexico yesterday, that he's basically only there because it bolsters his credentials with the people who on the West Coast like to be called Hispanics, but on the East Coast like to be called Latinos. And it's like, when you consider that there's almost 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, and then you look at the Puerto Rican population in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, how could that not be consequential,
It may well be consequential. And again, this is not, obviously we have new things that we're dealing with in this internet age, in this age of early voting and extreme political polarization. Everything is different now than it was 44 years ago. But in 1980, there was this massive swing at the last moment to Reagan. Those polls were neck and neck until about the last few days. And then, the day of election eve, President Carter was flying back, I think, from a rally in Minneapolis, and Pat Caddell sat with him in the presidential cabinet and said, "You're going to lose because we just saw the bottom fall out." And, there are last minute, sometimes the electorate just says, fuck it. I'm going to go for the new person, or I've had enough with this guy. And, maybe that could very well be happening right now with a lot of voters. We won't know until it's over, which is why polls are very, very useful tools. So you're not going to hear me dumping on polling, and you're not going to hear me dumping on polling pollsters' methodologies generally, because I think for the most part they're done in good faith and they're doing the best they can. But the one thing that they absolutely pollsters cannot do is know the future. They cannot know who it is who's going to change their minds. They cannot know who it is who ultimately is going to deliver on their promise if they're asked, are you going to vote? Yes. Not everybody does. So you cannot know who the electorate is until you actually have the electorate. Now now what's different now is we're having some early voting and you actually can see the electorate as it's coming in. It's not all on one day. And I think some of the indicators seem to be favoring Harris.
Mm-hmm.
Some places Republicans, but some a lot. There seems to be a lot of heavier female voting, and particularly heavy minority female voting, and that should bode well for her. But we don't know what's inside the envelopes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it should be pointed out that the election you referred to in 1980 ended up being a landslide of epic proportions.
Not like 84, but it was a clean victory. And I was a kid. Actually, I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I went to college. I'm I'm about a couple hundred yards away from where I was sitting watching TV, terrestrial TV, and it was 8:00 on the East Coast. And it was 5:00 in California, and they announced Reagan had won. Polls hadn't even closed out in the West,
mm-hmm.
and nobody thought it was going to be. Everybody thought it was going to be a nail biter.
Yeah, well, he got 44 states, and Carter only got 49 electoral votes. But so I'm thinking this election could possibly be a landslide because, to your point about polling, the polling has no way to count the closet Kamala votes, the wives who are going to vote, like based on Dobbs and Roe, because we've seen how those elections have turned out the last 2 years. Democrats have won virtually every election in the last 2 years, every special election. The only thing they really didn't win was the House, and that was supposed to be a 40 to 60 seat red wave, and it was 4 seats. So when you take everything we're discussing and just put it all together, it's like, how could it not be a landslide? So I personally think the case you cite in 1980, history could repeat itself. But there's also an equal part of me that's like, it's Donald Trump we're talking about, and we could be sitting here Wednesday morning.
That's exactly right. You have captured, you let off by asking me how I felt, and that is how I feel. I feel that optimism. I do think it could be a landslide. I do think it should be a landslide. I do think that the enthusiasm and also fear. I mean, fear is a great motivator, and Democrats are fucking terrified. And you know something? I'm sorry about the need for extra purchases of antacid, but I'm glad they're terrified.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I want those people to go out there and walk and do the canvassing and take people to the polls and vote early. No, I think it's great. So I, at the same time, I understand it. This is. It is not a 100% chance of victory for the forces of good, and we're this would be the biggest electoral disaster in American history if it doesn't come out that way. So I understand why people have that pit in their stomach. Well, I just can't go there. I just can't go. I'm gonna go. I just have, after dealing with this for several years, I'm just sort of relieved. There's nothing else I can do right now.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's like, the last days of school where there are no more tests, there are no more exams. It's like, I'm kind of relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds perverse, but...
no, it's like you're accepting your fate, which is that you have no control over your fate other than what you can do when you go in and vote. And we're all sitting here
and I have the satisfaction of feeling, look, I can't think of anything else I could have done.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a selfish feeling to have. I mean, I feel for the country, absolutely. But I'm not going to beat myself up. I can't feel like 4 years ago, if he had won, I would have been miserable
mm-hmm.
In a way that I will not be if he wins now.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be because I didn't feel like I did everything I could.
What do you think is going to happen post-election if he loses from a legal standpoint, from a violence standpoint? Would it be hyperbole to say that between next week and January 20th, if he loses, this country is going to experience shit that we've never, ever witnessed.
Anything is possible with this guy. We saw what happened last time. We saw how the lead up to violence built. And this guy is more desperate and more deranged than he was 4 years ago. Not just because he's deteriorated physically and cognitively, but he's more desperate because he knows he faces potential prison time if he is not elected president. I mean, this man, that's what I've been saying all along. This man is not just running for president. He is running for president in a way that no candidate we have ever seen ever has had to do. And so he's perfectly has no moral conscience, no compunction about stirring up violence. He thinks anything that keeps him out of jail is just and good. And so he will do that. He will try to stir up violence. Now, he's going to, there will bring litigation. Some of it, most of it, I'm sure, will be meritless. Some of it might have some, I don't know. But there are a couple things that are going the other way that lean the other way. One is there are going to be fewer lawyers to bring these bullshit lawsuits because everybody saw what happened to the ones who did the deed last time.
That's interesting.
And in terms of the violence, I do think that what happened to the January 6ers will deter people. Mm-hmm. That said, all it takes is a couple people with AR-15s to cause some trouble. Mm-hmm. And we just don't know. We don't know. Better that he loses and we play that hand out, though, than if he wins.
Mm-hmm. She's been racking up some really impressive endorsements, aside from the Cheneys and Kinzinger and Jeff Duncan and Alberto Gonzalez and all that. Now she has Arnold Schwarzenegger, LeBron James, Bad Bunny. He has Viktor Orban. Okay, which, I mean, that kind of sums it up pretty much, doesn't it? Like in this bottom of the ninth, like that's where it is. He's got Orban, she's got normal people.
And I wonder how much that thoroughly bizarre lineup he had at Madison Square Garden a few days ago was driven. I mean, it's driven by his insanity and the insanity of some people around him, but how much of it was driven by the fact they can't get relatively normal corrupt people to go on stage with them, right? The normal people who are morally corrupted, like, your typical Republican senator. Like, no one wants to take the risk of going up there with him.
Well, that's hopefully a good sign. We've got 4 days left. Hopefully these undecideds, if they do exist, decide to do the right thing. But we'll see on Tuesday. George, appreciate you coming back in, sharing some insights, and fingers crossed.
Thanks.
Alrighty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg. And co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander. And our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.